Yeah, also, we run a full service criminal and civil defense law firm that focuses on issues of firearms and self defense. So, if you get charged criminally because you've had to use your firearm in self defense, we take those criminal cases. We help you if the bad guy sues you.
I'd say probably the number one thing is do not be on your phone in public, to be aware of your surroundings.
You need to be able to map your background if you're going to have to use deadly force. And that starts before the deadly force interaction. It starts before the attack. You need to have a general awareness at all times of where the people are, of where the heavily trafficked areas are.
Today, we are very privileged to have with us two very special guests, Emily Taylor and Richard Hayes. Both of them are former felony prosecutors with extensive criminal trial experience, and they are both partners at the Houston-based law firm of Walker & Taylor. You may find them online at walkertaylorlaw.com. Apart from the unique legal issues of each case, they also understand that every client is a responsibility and a privilege. As trial attorneys, they work relentlessly to achieve the best possible outcome for every single client. Emily and Richard are well known in the firearms and Second Amendment community as Texas gun and weapons law authorities. To that end, they travel around the state and the country and present on self-defense, weapons law, and the legal aftermath following a defensive incident.
Texas is no more strict than federal law when it comes to purchasing firearms.
But criminal defense attorney Richard Hayes thinks gun law should have less to do with the firearm itself and more with analyzing if the individual is fit to bear arms.
I think we have to look at the actor, the criminal, the perpetrator, the monster in this situation, because, this is one of those unique phenomenon where there are calls to control the item. We don't see that with vehicles, we don't see that with airplanes, we don't see that with any other inanimate object except with firearms.
As far as what changes should be made to laws, Hayes says gun-free zone laws leave people defenseless and individuals should have the option to protect themselves.
I think we are all very sad about the tragedy in Uvalde, and our hearts are absolutely broken. But I hope that our lawmakers will look at this under sober circumstances.
Anything that could reasonably come to their attention that would express no guns is going to be a good, valid, no carry sign for constitutional carriers, whether that be a gun with a line through it, something that says weapons prohibited, no firearms. Anything that is likely to come to their attention is probably good enough under this new law.
They host a podcast called Armed Attorneys.
Fun little thing that all governments like to employ called no-knock warrants. There have been lots of state-level efforts to dispense with the no-knock warrant.
Earlier, they like reasonable, safe alternatives. If there's some alternative to using force or deadly force, they want you to take it every single time.
And I know there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, the person who's blocking my path on the hiking trail, they're obviously doing something wrong and there's got to be some sort of recourse. And I get that. But I will tell you that there are so many things that people can do. Worse than that, there are so many things people can do to you that do not quite rise to the level of criminal actions. Was him getting the baton justified in response to this guy coming up, invading his space? I mean, let's be honest. At his vehicle, invading his space, screaming at him. And the fact that the guy is open carrying. Do you think the retrieval of a baton, and not the way he did it, but just generally the retrieval of arming oneself, do you think that's justified?
Probably not in this situation.
This is Mary Starr. Welcome to Awake to Truth podcast. We are happy to have with us today Richard and Emily from Walker & Taylor. If you would, please tell us a little bit about your firm and what all you specialize in, and then we'll go from there on our content for today.
Sure. So we are the co-hosts of the Armed Attorneys on YouTube. Check us out, Armed Attorneys. And we cover self-defense simplified, the Second Amendment, and we try to put firearms law in plain English because just knowing the law is not enough. You have to know how it applies in real-world scenarios, and we're hoping to chat about that a little bit today.
Yes.
Yeah, also, we run a full-service criminal and civil defense law firm that focuses on issues of firearms and self-defense. So if you get charged criminally because you've had to use your firearm in self-defense, we take those criminal cases. We help you if the bad guy sues you. We help you get a NFA trust going if you want to buy a suppressor. If it touches firearms, we try to work on that.
That is great information to have. So let's go ahead and start with the topic that you brought up, Richard. Let's just start out with that.
Yeah, so we have kind of censorship on the march with YouTube. I think that's how we got in touch with each other, and
Yes, it is.
we see that affecting the Second Amendment community probably more than I would say a lot of other promoted communities on YouTube. And so that's kind of how things got started. YouTube seems to be moving the goalposts now that we're in an election season.
Okay. Yes, you're right. We all connected because of censorship. Emily, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
No, it's just I guess just that it's distressing because people say to us all the time, well, why don't you sue them? This is your First Amendment right. And unfortunately, because YouTube is not the government, although acting at the behest of often, I mean, Alvin Bragg triggered this latest round of firearm censorship by sending in some letters of demand to YouTube. It's not that simple. Private platforms, as the law stands right now, even these social media platforms, which really maybe should be given some different designation other than just private company can do whatever they want. As of right now, it's still a private company, can do whatever it wants. And so the fight against it isn't in the courtroom. It's not by the lawyers. The fight against it is, I mean, it's the collective action of everybody out there who cares, who doesn't think the voices should be censored.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more, but it's a tough battle to fight because we don't have the resources, obviously, that YouTube, Facebook, and others have. So, one of the things that I found interesting recently, I had a couple of videos taken down off of Facebook, and one of the ladies who follows me, she sent me some information on a court case that was resolved in the favor of Missouri about this time last year. And in that court case, part of the testimony that they used that helped find in favor of the plaintiff were internal emails from Facebook. And I think that speaks volumes as to what's going on behind the scenes. And it's a matter of public record. It's part of the court docket now.
Yeah, and we've seen, there's actually a case that kind of intermingles with this in the Second Amendment community. It just came out of New York where, we had their government leaning heavily on insurance companies saying, don't do business with firearms owners. That'd be a real shame of what happened to your insurance company if you kept doing business with these. In this case, it was the NRA. And we have a Supreme Court case now that says, hey, look, if the government wouldn't be allowed to do this, if the government is restrained because of the protections under the First Amendment, then you can't subvert the Constitution and use some third party, an agent or another corporation, and coerce them to do something the government isn't allowed to do. And so we see a little bit of pushback here, but it doesn't seem to slow them down.
No, and that was a unanimous Supreme Court decision too, which is interesting. I mean, even the liberal justices got on board with, this was the government suppressing free speech of, a firearm organization. So you hope that it would be something that we all agree on, but it's not always that simple, I guess.
Well, I'm pleasantly surprised that it wasn't a unanimous decision. That's rare in cases involving Second Amendment, in my opinion.
Oh, big time.
Oh, yeah. So, do you want to talk about the Rahimi case yet, or do you want to keep on paddling down the path of censorship? We've got plenty of time.
Yeah, I could. Let me just give a little overview of what YouTube's change of policy is, and we could talk about that.
Yeah.
And so, as it relates to the Second Amendment community specifically, YouTube, just recently on June the 18th, implemented some additional rules in what firearms content is going to be restricted, specifically the demonstration or use of machine guns, what they deem as high capacity magazines, what you and I would call standard capacity magazines, and anything that would show firearm assemblies. A lot of people, some of these firearms devices are very complicated. They need instruction on it. And
Right.
so where do you go? But the internet's a great resource for that stuff. And so YouTube has said, we are not going to allow any of this content. And in fact, we're going to go back into your previous catalog of published videos, and we're going to start placing restrictions on your videos that, kind of meet our new standards here. So it's almost, it's, we don't allow folks to do that in the law. Obviously, YouTube's a private company, but this is kind of ex post facto elimination of firearms content on YouTube.
That's incredible.
And
Everybody.
I mean, well, and it's big bucks. It's big bucks for a lot of these small creators. Maybe they're not making a huge living off of YouTube, but I mean, every little bit helps. I'll tell you, we've only had maybe 2 videos really hardcore censored or age restricted by YouTube, and we're a commentary channel. We're 2 talking heads telling people about gun laws, and if we're getting affected by this stuff, I can only imagine these folks who are trying to demonstrate or educate, how they're going to be impacted. So it's very troubling.
So they were censoring you, and did they like just totally shut down the video, or did they just remove certain parts of it, or did they blur out the verbiage, the audio?
No, what they've done to us is age restrict us, which stops people from watching. You have to be logged into your YouTube account. You have to click through a series of, yes, I'm sure I really do want to watch this video, and then it's not being advertised to as many people. So, and you're not making any money off of it at that point.
Right.
So it is, it is effectively shadow banning your content. Which, again, is, for a lot of these creators, every little bit counts. And you put the money and the time into creating an episode of content, and there needs to be something to show for it, or else, you got to find a new line of work.
Right.
Yeah. And that in the episode that was most recently age restricted, I mean, it was almost like a PSA, for the public to watch out for a scam that's going around where illegal aliens are fraudulently obtaining visas to remain in the country by staging fake crimes. If you're a crime victim, you can you have a very quick and easy path to getting a visa here in the United States. And so we see this trend of illegal aliens staging fake robberies with themselves as the victim so that they can therefore go and get a visa. And so it was hey, self-defenders, look out. There are these fake robberies going on all over the place. It's happening a ton in Houston. And so, we're really coming from a sincere place of educating the public, and to see that stuff get age restricted is very discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
So approximately when was that video first aired?
That was the beginning of June.
Yeah.
Okay. It seems to me that it's all really ramped up in the month of June. And that's when my problems hit, both with YouTube and with Facebook. So I think the timeline is significant in that we've all 3 had that happen. But,
yes, and some of the strategies that YouTube is employing are very insidious and almost unrecognizable unless you had some kind of algorithm looking at these things. But what they'll do is they'll take an independent voice like yourself, and instead of necessarily feeding them other independent voices, or you're even showing your videos to the people that normally watch your videos, we call it small siloing. What they'll do is they'll feed them a Fox News video, which seems harmless enough. Hey, look, they're getting a Fox News video. That's a conservative voice on the right, theoretically, but it's still part of the mainstream, and the mainstream narrative is so different than the things that you and I talk about, that it kind of silos people who are looking for this independent content into the controlled programming that we see on big news stations.
that's just insane. I can't even recognize America as we see it today. It is so different.
Yeah.
Another thing that I see at play in what you were doing is that you were going in the face of an administration who's all about immigration, legal or otherwise. And so the fact that you were pointing out these issues that would play well into the hand of an illegal immigrant, to learn about that, I have to say I question if the government would have been a little bit complicit in that censorship. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do wonder in this election year if the things that will be hot buttons are not direct targets, because we saw in the last election cycle the government, trying to, well, I guess it was the 2016 cycle, the government telling the social media companies what to promote, what not to
Mm-hmm.
promote, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. We saw it from the Biden administration after he took office as well. I can't imagine it is any different or any lessened right now, coming up on a very tight election, even this far out. I mean, um, you know, I think I hope it's not a nail biter when it comes November, but it sure could be given the current polls. And I think the government's going to use every tool at its disposal, including what do people care about the most? Well, they care about immigration, they care about the Second Amendment, a number of other hot button topics will suppress the things that are going to get those red voters up in arms and ready to go, because, I mean, it's worked in the past.
Right. I I hear you. The video that Facebook took down that I posted up, it it wasn't a public service announcement, but I interviewed a lady who had lost her son to fentanyl poisoning, and I also included two local police officers in that. They're sheriff's deputies. And we were talking about the huge spike in fentanyl poisonings and the deaths, and how young people need to be aware of all of that. And it was gone. I posted it, and then I went back, and it was gone in 2 minutes. But I thought I saw something that said it was okay, so I went back and reposted again, taken down again. So twice within less than 10 minutes.
Wow.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I mean, you see that it's baked into the review process, because when a creator uploads a video, they have a computer that looks at every frame of the video. They transcribe the audio. They're looking at all of the words that are being said. And so that the plan is baked into the algorithm. It's not, some independent human. And so um, uh, it, it's just wild, the kinds of things. I mean, Emily and I mean, we find ourselves self-censoring a lot of times on YouTube. I mean, we have probably several dozen words that we just know if we say this word, it's going to get us dinged, and so we don't say that word. I mean, and it stinks, but YouTube is still the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and we have to, in order to reach the most people, we still have to fight on that platform.
Here's something interesting I noticed from the video that they took down, Facebook, that is. I had posted that same video back in May. The heading or the description was just slightly different, but it was in May, it was not in June. And the one thing that was different in the description was that I literally used a quote straight off of the DEA website. I thought certainly with that being the source of it, it would be safe. And it said straight up, fentanyl is the greatest threat facing America. And something in that triggered Facebook, and that's what took it down, I believe, because the video had been fine before that. So different month, different wording, and it was gone. So what do you say? Can you describe scenarios where you would like to say something and you can't, what, because of knowing that word is going to get you censored? What do you do?
We're usually creative on our feet. Emily's better at it than I am.
No, but yeah, unfortunately, I mean, particularly in the pandemic era, it was especially bad. There were lots of, we did lots of talking around issues, and yeah, it's certainly, we just have to hope that people get the gist of what we're saying.
Right?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I think we should just have something on the screen that says opposite world, and then we just say the opposite of what we think is actually going on, and then YouTube would probably promote it.
Sure.
That's probably a really good idea. So you're on 3 days a week. That's a lot of video footage.
It is. Luckily there is a lot of Second Amendment news out there, and we try to touch on, everything from new court decisions to this self-defense incident just happened, let's break it down, to, gosh, we're even breaking out a little bit to interactions with law enforcement, and we just did a video last week on whether or not we think using a dash cam in your vehicle is a good idea. So there is no shortage of firearms Second Amendment related content out there. So 3 videos is definitely a lot of work, but boy, we could do several a day probably with all of the ideas we have.
Well, and plus that's being brought to you by clients who say, I need help. Here's what happened to me. And so you get a real life incident to work on as an attorney, but you also can use that in your video content.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And we pull a lot from our actual interactions with real humans who have needed our help, which is great. And as attorneys, we do, we generally, even when we have clients who say, use my name, you can talk specifically about me, it's fine. We generally don't. We discuss these things in a way that's purely anonymous. You can't go in and find who we're talking about or what issue it was or where they were or what happened, exactly, because we want to protect people's privacy, even though generally they are happy to have their privacy blown apart just to see us talk about the issue. But there are lots and lots of real world problems that affect these people that we hope are helpful to everybody else.
Right. What are some things that you would say from a situational awareness perspective? I'm sure you deal with some of that. What are some things you would recommend people do? Just common sense things that a lot of people may not think about.
I'd say probably the number one thing is do not be on your phone in public. To be aware of your surroundings. I mean, that's low hanging fruit, and a lot of people can benefit from that. As far as self-defense goes, that's kind of the big one. And we see a lot of people intervening in cases where they don't necessarily know what's going on, and not being on your phone contributes to that. If you're not paying attention, you look up and you think, oh, look, a robbery is taking place, and really it's a son helping his mother with dementia into the car, and she doesn't know, and she's reacting poorly to the situation. And if you intervene in that situation, you're probably going to be looked at as the bad guy, right? And so just having awareness is probably the biggest kind of overarching theme you'll see. And then among other things, juries like to see a handful of factors of what makes a good self-defense case. And I'll let Em talk about, Em, what do you think is the most important out of those?
So we actually have a high profile case in Houston right now that illustrates this pretty nicely. You need to be able to map your background if you're going to have to use deadly force. And that starts before the deadly force interaction. It starts before the attack. You need to have a general awareness at all times of where the people are, of where the heavily trafficked areas are, of all of it, because we have this very high profile case in which a gentleman here in Houston was being robbed. The robber was fleeing, and he was robbed at an ATM. The robber was fleeing with his wallet, cash, everything, and he shot at him as he fled. I mean, he was still dangerous, and also in Texas, we let people do that. You're allowed to to shoot someone who's fleeing with your things. Unfortunately, as he was shooting, he shot into a car that was unrelated because the robber had ducked behind, and a young girl was killed. And we had the Harris County DA's office actually go back to the grand jury after the grand jury declined to indict him. They took it again with a special prosecutor and with this FBI hack they found to, essentially lie, I think, about what he saw in the video. I mean, he's telling the grand jury that he can tell from the video that while he was shooting, he intentionally shot into an innocent car out of rage, which is, can't tell that from a video. That's crazy. And here he is. He's indicted for murder for having to defend himself from a robber. And yes, something absolutely horrible happened. It doesn't make him a murderer, though. And so I think that's a very important aspect of situational awareness, though, is you need to know when you're shooting, where generally are my people? Where are the heavily trafficked areas? Where are the thoroughfares? Because unfortunately, in the world we're living in now, that is an area that is ripe for a particularly firearm hostile prosecutor to go after you.
And the county that you're in makes a lot of difference as well, does it not?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, it's everything.
Yeah, we joke here about dragging bodies across the county line. Don't drag a body. It really,
don't do that.
but it makes, really, it makes a huge difference. Even just here, we're in the greater Houston area. I live right on the border between 2 counties, And boy, I know which one I'd rather have a self-defense incident, I'll tell you that. And it's, my neighborhood spans 3 counties, and I can tell you which one I'd rather be in. The political wins for these prosecutors, what way they're blowing that day has a great impact on whether or not a self-defender is put through the ringer or whether or not the police agencies are allowed to do the right thing. Because my understanding of that case, that's the Daniel Perry matter, is that
Yep.
the investigators on the case actually recommended that he not be charged, and yet the prosecution was so gung-ho they managed. I mean, you can indict anything, anyone, anything, for the most part, particularly here in our state. And so it is absolutely a miscarriage of justice. It's absolutely incredible. It only gets worse as the world gets more politicized, because when the Democratic DAs in particular are elected or in an election cycle, they are heavily motivated to go and railroad the gun owners, the self-defenders, and we see it. I mean, not just Travis County, we see it in any of the big blue counties.
Yeah, and relevant to your audience, I mean, it's what we call anarcho-tyranny. It's selective enforcement of the law. And unfortunately, normal people have the most to lose. You have a house, you have a car, you have a family, you have a steady job. You got a lot to lose. And a lot of these other folks, I mean, they're criminals. They got nothing left to lose. I mean, they don't have anything to their name. And so for them, there's really no consequences for their actions. If they lose, they haven't lost anything. And so it's very important for regular folks, responsible people, to be extra on guard in these situations because of the stakes.
Right. That's good advice. I mean, I just feel so sorry for that poor guy, because he was stuck in traffic and he had nowhere to go. He had no choice. He could not flee the scene. That was terrible.
To tie it back into Facebook, I think what's really awful about his case is that, in part, I mean, I think he was as much convicted on what he said to his friends on Facebook Messenger as he was anything to do with anything else that was entailed in that actual situation. And, sure enough, Facebook released, you are not safe in sending your messages on Facebook. They released all of those messages to the prosecution, and here we are. He said some, I don't know. It upset his jury. He was anticipating that he was going to have to get into one of these situations. He didn't like the rioters, and the prosecution, boy, did they shove that in the jury's faces to make him look like he planned the whole thing. He was just a bad guy. He said some things you probably don't like to his friends. He's guilty.
It is a total miscarriage of justice. You said it well. So, what are some of the other cases that you see come through your doors a lot, in addition to things like this?
Yeah, I'd say there's really a pretty short list of the most common cases, and this is where people need to use extra caution. Road rage, by far, one of the most common scenarios people find themselves in. Guns and cars don't mix. It's not worth it. Slow down, get away, drive to a police station. Don't flash your gun in traffic. Those cases are very easy to prosecute and very disruptive. It's almost like you're guilty until proven innocent. So I say avoid road rage like the plague. Dog attack cases, our Texas self-defense laws don't actually contemplate defense against dogs. If we look at our self-defense law, it says against another person. And so the defense we have to rely on for these dog bite cases is what's called the defense of necessity in most cases. And that's really a balancing act by the court. So defense against animals, not very strong. Neighbor disputes, if you have a neighbor, avoid neighbor disputes like the plague. What else do we have, Em?
That really catches most of it. And I think the thing that people are most scared of, which is, just that random home break-in, or that random attack, on the street, someone points a gun in your face, demands your wallet. Those are the least likely of all of these things. It is, cars, all the things that you don't contemplate are going to happen to you are probably your most likely defensive scenario. And people call us all the time and they want to talk through, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And of course, we're happy to talk people through the castle doctrine and everything that they're thinking about. But we just try to remind people that if it happens to you, it's going to be something that you have never, ever considered, right? It's going to be your stepdaughter's new boyfriend who's drunk and violent at a family barbecue who viciously attacks you. I mean, it's going to be something it's not the stranger, it's not the middle of the night, and it gets messy and gray and gets the police's attention really quickly. It's just it's a choose your own adventure of just the craziness.
Wow. I can see how one of those could go sideways so easily, and a lot of shades of gray.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
And Richard mentioned neighbor disputes. That's one of the really great examples is that, anytime you have a prior relationship with someone, you might think that that's helpful to you. Like, well, I know that he's crazy and he's done all of these things to me in the past, when really it's just injecting so much gray because he or his wife or his family or whomever's actually talking to the police, they've got all those same stories about you. And the police aren't there to arbitrate who's actually the crazy guy, right? They're there to, probably arrest the person who shot the other person and let the court system figure it out.
Right. I had a guy on earlier this week, and it also had to do with Second Amendment rights. He basically said, if you shoot somebody, even though you're the good guy, you can expect to spend a night in jail while the police are sorting it out.
Yeah, I think a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's true more often than not. And the reason is it's the way that Texas's self-defense laws are written. They're affirmative defenses. They're defenses to what would otherwise be a crime. General rule, can't shoot people, can't stab people, can't run people over the car, can't do all these things. But sometimes it's okay. And that's where self-defense comes in because you're saving your life, you're saving a loved one. It's a last resort. You have your back up against the wall. But the only person who's legally required to consider a self-defense claim is a trial judge or a trial jury. And so that comes at the very end. So in the meantime, the police have arrested you, the magistrate judge has found probable cause for the crime, you've gone to court, the DAs are going to say, okay, we're going to kick the can, we're going to let a jury decide this, and it's extremely life disruptive, and Emily will tell you, I mean, you don't have a single client who, if they're acquitted at trial, feels like a winner because the system is a process. The process is the punishment. It's a terrible, terrible thing to experience. And so, that's our probably number one tip to folks is avoid it if you can.
Right. If you had to name a dollar amount for just an average case that comes through your door, what do you think that looks like as far as legal fees go?
Well, it depends on what kind of case. Let's say that I would say most typical, you're charged with a felony because you pointed a gun at someone, right? So we're not talking about a trial that's going to include medical examiners or hospital records and doctors and things like that. So sort of like maybe the lowest level Second Amendment defensive issue that you could possibly think of. It's depending on what county it's in. It's going to be somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000.
Okay, another going out on a limb question. Homeowners insurance, the liability portion of that, does that help with your fees?
No, but it probably helps you if the bad guy sues you civilly for his damages. So your homeowner's insurance will often pick up that civil suit. And in fact, I've seen homeowners insurance do it when the incident does not even happen in the home. People have umbrella policies. I had a client who shot someone in a parking lot miles from his house, and his homeowners insurance actually assigned a lawyer and picked up that case. Now, I guess the good and the bad with that is, of course, you don't have to pay for your lawyer. And if there is a settlement, your homeowner's insurance is going to pay that settlement. The bad is, of course, your insurance is going to go way up. You may end up having to get a different policy. And, Richard and I, in fact, talked to someone very recently who was having to deal with this with an insurer. And he was dead set, like, I don't want one penny to go to this guy because he didn't do the right thing and I didn't do anything wrong. And why is my insurance paying him? And the sad answer to that is you don't have, once the insurance picks it up, you don't have any control over whether or not they pay out. And more often than not, they're going to pay something out because they figure it's cheaper to pay them a little bit of money now than to pay lawyers for the next several years while it's litigated.
Yes.
And so then it encourages the bad behavior, and we end up in this cycle where, a plaintiff's lawyer will take a case knowing that the insurance company will pay it out very quickly and easily.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Richard, what do you have to add to all of that?
No, I completely agree. It's creating a bad incentive structure. When we see crummy plaintiffs' lawyers trying to shake down self-defenders for, defending themselves. I mean, it's already the person's worst day of their life, if they have to take another person's life. Emily and I are both registered lobbyists. We lobby for Gun Owners of America. We, try to pass good laws, and that's one of our legislative efforts next session is working on immunity for defenders and bolstering immunity for defenders in the civil realm. Specifically, I don't know if you recall or not, the Kyle Carruth case out of, I believe it was Midland, but he had to defend himself, no billed by a grand jury, and is currently being sued. And it's a huge pain point. And we think if a grand jury has no billed you, clearly you acted in self-defense. Why should you spend the next several years paying out of pocket for doing the right thing? And so bolstering defenses for people who've been no billed, people who've been acquitted, whose cases have been dismissed on the criminal side, I think that should create some kind of presumption of no liability on the civil side. And so that's something we're working towards next session.
Yeah. And, pardon me.
No, you go ahead.
Well, just to add to Richard's point, and Richard knows better than I because he actually works on some of these civil cases, whereas I am mostly, criminal. But we have already this idea in Texas that if you use self-defense and you do it in accordance with our self-defense laws in Chapter 9 of the Penal Code, that you should not be held civilly liable, right? So you shouldn't actually have to pay out of pocket ordered by a jury for their damages. But and what the point that Richard is making, I think, is a really good one, and it's important to distinguish. There's nothing that stops you from having to pay through the process until you get there. So, at the end of the day, for most people, it doesn't matter if that, ultimately the judge says, okay, well, the jury awarded this money, but I have to strike that because it's against this provision of the Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Because at that point, if you've already paid your lawyer $100,000, you're done. And so it really is important to jump in and protect those people far earlier than the law already contemplates.
That's a really good point. So that will come up in the next session, I hope, next year.
Absolutely.
Good. What do you think the support level will be for that?
I think it's actually very high. We have a few high-profile cases, and it's because these things come out of the woodwork. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios that you don't imagine until they happen to somebody. We had a woman up in Dallas, for example, who stopped a burglar climbing through her daughter's window in her apartment complex. She stopped the attempted burglar, and she got kicked out of her apartment. She got evicted. It's you and I, we don't lose our house when we act in self-defense. Why should tenants lose their rights just because they're a tenant? And so these things you don't see support for them until you have this big use case. And I think the Kyle Carruth matter, I think, is a great use case to say, hey, look, normal people out there, you could act in justified self-defense, and then you could lose everything because of the way the civil side of the law is set up. And we have an immunity from damages provision that says, you're entitled to no money if the person acted in justified defense, but that is not working. It's not scaring away these plaintiffs' lawyers. And so we have to we got to change the law. And so I think once people see, the use cases, I think the support will be high.
That to me sounds like just another version of Lawfare.
Nope. And I think Emily and I had that exact discussion. I think that's exactly how we're going to, that's exactly what it is. And I think that's how we're going to explain it to people.
It's just it's wrong that a person should have to be facing that when they've already been no billed by a grand jury. That, to me, is common sense. But that's another thing that's sadly lacking today.
Exactly right.
Richard, you mentioned in the case of a divorce, frequently a restraining order is issued. So let's assume that that goes away after a certain period of time. Does the person who had the restraining order against them, do they regain their Second Amendment rights at that point?
They do, and that's the way the law is written right now. As long as you've been provided notice of the order of prohibition and the order has not expired, that's when the prohibition exists. And so, yes, for our folks who have to get a divorce, they would regain their rights. Those temporary orders, a lot of times, and especially if you find yourself in that scenario and you tell your lawyer, hey, look, like I had a client who owned a gun store. It'd be very, very difficult for him to not be able to possess firearms. That would probably put him in the poorhouse. So, making your attorney aware of, hey, this is a really important issue to me, because a lot of divorce attorneys will just say, yeah, we're going to go with the standard order and then we'll figure it out later. Or people who are filing an uncontested divorce themselves, maybe not utilizing a lawyer, they don't know necessarily what they're walking into. And so then in that scenario, it's very helpful to get a lawyer. But yes, the short answer to your question is they would get their rights restored at the expiration of the order. But a lot of times, some of these cases, they start uncontested, then they become contested, and then they get drawn out, and then you're looking at losing potentially your Second Amendment rights for a significant period of time, leaving you very vulnerable.
That doesn't seem quite fair in one respect.
No. And, the scary part is that because the order doesn't specifically say you're not allowed to possess firearms, there are as many people as not who are actually breaking federal law unknowingly. Because what happens is the order says you are restrained from stalking, harassing, hurting physically this other party. And it's aimed at both parties, regardless of the fact that there was probably no physical altercations between them to begin with. It's just the courts look at it the same way as don't steal money from the community bank account. Also, don't be mean to each other. Don't hit each other over the course of these proceedings. And that language is the trigger that suspends the Second Amendment rights. And we talk to lots of even just family attorneys who don't realize that that is what's happened and aren't capable then of advising their clients how to obey the law. And so, our hallmark case on this was actually a man who had no idea that that was a restriction. Somehow his wife, who he was divorcing, figured it out. I don't know if she had a legal savvy whispering in her ear in the background or she just managed to figure it out by herself. Called the police on him, had him arrested, and he actually went to federal prison for it without ever knowing he was breaking the law.
Oh my goodness. That's sad. Wow. Okay. So, what are some things you'd like to mention as we come to our close today?
Richard, did you want me to go through some of there was one issue that we sort of left aside, which was our general self-defense principles that we want to see in a courtroom, and we sort of went on a tangent. Did you guys want to address that?
Sure, yeah, if you want to.
Yeah. So, and Richard, you can pick me up because I'll never be able to name them all off the top of my head. But really, if you are trying to make sure that if you've defended yourself, you end up winning that legal battle, there are lots of considerations that are just very easy right off the top of your head that you need to put in your mind already. You need to be able to have done everything you can to have avoided that situation. Juries love to see that you're the guy who didn't want to escalate. You want to avoid, you want to de-escalate. You want to go in with clean hands. You don't want to be, if you look at the case of road rage, you don't want to be the guy who threw up the bird and then someone did something crazy and you had to defend yourself. You want to be, the better person and, the good representative of the Second Amendment the whole time. What else were our good principles, Richard?
Yeah, so imminence, acting right then. There's no time to call for help. You have to act right then. I will say, innocence. what level of force are you using? In Texas, when we say force, we mean something that might hurt or leave a mark. Think punch, grab, tackle, restrain. And when we say deadly force, we mean something that would cause somebody to lose their life or lose a limb. So using the appropriate amount of force with it. And then, the overarching theme is reasonableness. What would an ordinary and prudent person do if they were in your exact same situation? And I will say, of the factors that are most important, Emily has hit them dead on. Avoidance. They want avoidance, even though we're not in a duty to retreat state. Texas is a stand your ground state. Juries will always, it's always in the back of their mind, even though they're told explicitly not to consider your failure to retreat, they just can't help themselves. And so avoiding it, acting as a last resort. And then I think the number one thing that she pointed out was, not starting this chain of events that leads to your use of force or deadly force. And, in the law, when we use the term, when we think about starting the fight, we say provocation. Legal provocation means basically you trick the person as a pretext into using force or deadly force. And juries, I think they have a problem with that. We'll set it aside for a moment. But juries instinctively do not like it when you start this domino or this chain of events that leads to you having to use force or deadly force. Maybe it's somebody without a handicap placard parking in a handicap spot, and you take a picture of their license plate. Can't tell you how many cases like that I've had. Maybe it's flipping the bird like Emily was talking about. But you see, if you are this person that, who would think, oh, I'm going to take a picture of their license plate? Who would think the next series of events I'm going to end up taking somebody's life? But the narrative then becomes, hey, you just killed somebody over a parking spot. The way that these things are twisted. And so you don't want to be, what juries like is for you to be this innocent person, beep-bopping along, forced to respond to a threat. You stop the threat, you preserve your own life. That's what they want. They don't want you going out and kind of, sticking your nose in other people's business, for lack of a better term. They want you to be this innocent, clean hands person. And so those, I would say, are the two most important. Emily pointed those out, but obviously you need proportionality and reasonableness.
That's good advice. Thank you for sharing that. So would one of you mind sharing your contact information, how people can find you?
You want to do that, Em?
Oh, sure. Do you want me to share do you want me to share the questions email or just the website, or?
All right. How about I do armed attorneys and then you do the website?
Okay.
Yeah, so we talk about these issues 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, on YouTube, Rumble, and X, at the Armed Attorneys, so youtube.com/armed attorneys. We're going to have a website. We're working on that right now because of the YouTube censorship issue we talked about earlier. We're trying to build an arc, for lack of a better term, where folks can find a home, armedattorneys.com. But if you enjoy the kind of discussion that we had here, that's where you can find us.
Mm-hmm. And you can also contact us through our law firm website, which is walkertaylorlaw.com.
And I'm just going to give you a plug for how quickly you all responded. When I contacted you about trying to set up this interview today, I sent the email in the evening of, I don't know, whatever day it was. And the next morning before, before 9 o'clock, for sure, I had a reply from the person who at your front office probably intercepted the message and then forwarded, I think, to you, Richard, and then you responded. Response time was amazing. I don't ever see that. So kudos to you for having great response.
Well, that's part of having handled a lot of self-defense cases out of our firm. We have to have that emergency response infrastructure, and so I'll attribute it to that.
Well, you guys do a great job at that, so thank you for that. Thank you
Absolutely.
for being on today. You've been great guests. So everybody pay attention to their contact information. Hopefully, if you find yourself in that situation, you will be able to remember this information and call them. And we thank you very much for being on with us today.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.